It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. Have you ever worked on a project before where you were trying to decide what went wrong? And you know that the old proverbial phrase, heads are going to roll and that things are going to go bad or whatever the case may be. One of the things that I've found is that when this happens, many organizations really struggle or suffer with what they need to do from a leadership perspective and who's going to be held accountable for these actions. I often hear somebody's going to lose their job over this, is another quote. And my question for you is from a leadership perspective, what is the right approach for this? While there should be some level of accountability, does that mean that that level of accountability is going to be held on one individual, and that one individual is just going to be the fall person for that particular problem? Or does it mean that we need to think larger and figure out how we can solve problems a different way? I was talking with someone, a dear friend of mine who does coaching as well. And one of the things that she told me is that when it comes to leadership, she says good leaders, strong leaders, focus on what happened, not on who's responsible for what happened. And I thought about that for a second. I let it sink in. What the problem is, while it's so important, and why it happened, and how we can prevent it from happening again. All those questions are way more important than who, but who has to play into it somewhere too. So, being devil's advocate, I want to argue that who is important. And it's not so much who so that we can make sure they lose their job over it, but it's who so that we can make sure we're having the right conversations so that this person can receive the education or training so it doesn't happen again. I had a situation where I was on a flight back from Canada not too long ago. And on this flight back from Canada, we had a flight attendant who was being rather snarky. Let me explain. So, guilty as charged. I'm part of a weight loss journey just like everyone else is. But the problem I have is whenever people around me lose weight, I always tend to find it. And it's not always a good thing. So, with that being said, in this particular aircraft, I needed a seatbelt extender. So, I asked the flight attendant for a seatbelt extender, and her answer was no. And I was like, no, what's going on with that? And she explained that because I was sitting in the emergency exit row, that they could not give me one. And I thought to myself, I'm like, that's just the strangest thing I've ever heard. I've never had a problem getting a seatbelt extender in the past. And she walked off, and I wholeheartedly thought she was joking and that she was going to go get one and bring it back. I thought it was just one of those kind of things. So she does come back. And she climbed into the row in front of me and folded her arms and leaned on the seat and looked down at me and said, "Oh, I got to watch this." At which point I froze. I didn't know what to say. And for me, me not knowing what to say, that dumbfounding me is quite the achievement. But I couldn't believe that she was having the type of day that she felt like watching me attempt to buckle a seatbelt was going to bring her great joy because she felt like there was no way that I was ever going to get it to connect. The news that shocked her was not only was I able to manipulate my way in the seat so that it did connect, but that I instructed everyone around me not to ask me to unbuckle because I wasn't getting up until that plane hit the ground in Florida. And it was just so interesting because her behavior and the way she carried herself, it wasn't like I said, I want to see her lose her job. But it also wasn't, "Oh, joy," she encouraged me or motivated me to do something outside the box. I felt like there was a serious training issue. And there were several other things that were said and exchanged. But the point I'm trying to make is sometimes the who does matter. Because I don't think that whole crew should have been accountable for her actions. I don't think that the whole organization should be shut down because she made a bad choice. But I do feel like it was a valuable training opportunity for that individual. So I think part of the things that I think of when I start to consider and think about leadership is that leadership should be focused on impact and it should be focused on how and what. But they also do need to discuss the who and have those meaningful training conversations or make sure those conversations happen so that we're not constantly feeding the hidden factory and feeding the who again. So I think a big part of what we need to take away from this episode is that it's important for us to not lay blame, but it's also important for us to recognize training opportunities. And I think that strong leaders have a combination of both. They don't necessarily want to just call someone out as an individual and say, hey, this all rests on you. But they also don't want to hold a team accountable for an individual's irresponsibility or unreliability. So the key is to understand and do root cause analysis and figure out what's going on. And to understand that strong leaders realize one thing, they realize impact. And they ask that question: what impact is this going to have if I confront a single individual? What impact is it going to have if I hold a team completely accountable instead of that individual? What impact is it going to have if I try to work more closely to facilitate training or thought process with that team? And what can I do as a leader to make a difference so that in the future this doesn't happen again? What value can I provide to help facilitate the right conversation so we don't wind up in that same scenario? What I can tell you is strong leaders don't just look to the teams for accountability, but they ask themselves what they could have done better to make a difference. All right, that's going to do it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, you can always reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com, where I'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.